Welcome. Thank you so much for watching the KC Auction video blog today. I'm really excited to introduce my good friend and special guest, Trisha Brauer. Trisha Brauer owns Taking Bids Benefit Auctions or Taking Bids Fundraising. She lives here in the Kansas City area, and I'm really excited to have Trisha on the show today. Hi, Trisha. How are you doing?
I'm well, Jason. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm so excited you could be here. For those of you watching us who don't know who Trisha is, Trisha Brauer lives here in the Roland Park area in Kansas City, a suburb of the major metropolitan area. She has an MBA. She has her Certified Auctioneers Institute and Benefit Auctioneer Specialist designations. She's earned those through the National Auctioneers Association. She is also a Ward 3 council member in Roland Park. Mm-hmm. She serves on boards. One of the things that's probably the most impressive to me is that Trisha is obviously very passionate about the benefit auctioneer world and the foundations and associations she works with. But probably from the outside looking in, big sisters and big brothers is probably her most important. And I love the saying, you can tell a person's quality by the quality of person they keep. And I keep Trisha in my close group of friends because she does all these amazing things and such that in 2018, she was recognized as Big Sister of the Year by the Big Sisters and Big Brothers organization here in Kansas City. And I love seeing her posts about her little sister, Mia, and the growth in their relationship and the things that Mia has accomplished over those years. Today, we're going to be talking about benefit auctions. We're going to be talking about how your organization can benefit from hiring a professional auctioneer. Later in the show, we're going to offer you a free financial evaluation of your last event. So stay tuned for that. And finally, even though she is a Cubs fan, you can see that by the Wrigley Field Cubs fan, and baseball's behind her. We love her here in Kansas City. Trisha, why don't you start by telling us what kind of led you to being a benefit auctioneer, helping foundations and organizations fundraise, and just kind of how you started your company.
Sure. Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. I grew up in the auction business, and my stepdad is an auctioneer, and for years he kept saying that I should be an auctioneer, and I just thought that was the most crazy thing that anybody had ever said. Like, why would I want to be an auctioneer? I originally went to college with a degree in public relations and English, with aspirations of working in a major corporation and in the corner office and all that fun stuff. And the more I worked on that goal, the more not super fun I realized it was. And in 2010, I finally listened to my stepdad when he said, just go to auction school. If you hate it, then at least you'll know. And I went and I fell absolutely in love with it. And I knew by the second day that I had found the world in which I was supposed to live. And I decided that I was going to become a full-time auctioneer. And so I left auction school in February of 10, put together a business plan that allowed me to walk away from my corporate America job in February of 2011, and have been doing this full-time and haven't looked back since. And that's how we ended up here.
Wow, you left a corporate America job to be an auctioneer. You brave, crazy soul. That's great. And I know you're super busy, generally speaking, doing 50 plus events a year, something like that across the country. But yeah, it's amazing you've gotten to there, but it's amazing. That's a huge risk that people don't realize how big a risk it is to open up any small business. It doesn't matter what industry or field you're in. So congratulations on that, on the bravery to do that, the strength to do that, and surviving and not just surviving, but being a leading force in the benefit auction space. We haven't touched on yet, but you helped create the curriculum for the Benefit Auctioneer Specialist designation, I believe.
Yes.
You teach not only classes about benefit auctions, you teach business classes at a local community college. You're super passionate about serving your community and your clients. This has always been a tricky conversation. And if people are watching, have questions for Trisha or I, about anything you hear about benefit auctions, please post them below. We'll get to them as best we can. There's 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. Funding has decreased for many of them, from both public and private places. It's a huge area of concern. I even saw articles on Salesforce about benefit auctions. So having set up all of that and looking at where we're kind of at, how does a nonprofit benefit from hiring a professional benefit auctioneer as opposed to using the DJ or the TV host or just a local celebrity. Not that those people are bad at what they do, but what kind of things does a professional benefit auctioneer bring to the table for a nonprofit that those kinds of people just will not do?
Well, growing up, my father was a tradesmith, and he always had a quote that said, "If you think it's expensive to hire a professional, hire an amateur." And that's always a quote that I've lived by. And if you've ever tried to do your home improvement projects yourself and, several $100s in and you're like, okay, never mind, I'm just going to call the plumber, I'm going to call the electrician because they obviously can do it better than I can. It's somewhat of a silly analogy, but it is very similar in that professionals do what professionals do best, and that is their job. Right. So the reason why, hiring a professional benefit auctioneer over using somebody who donates their services, which again, like you said, Jason, there's absolutely nothing wrong with. Many of times those folks, do a good job. But the reason why professionals do it better is a couple of reasons. One is that this is the area in which I live and breathe every single day. This is how I keep food on my table and keep a roof over my head, how I keep my dogs in premium dog treats, which they very much, they appreciate. They're bougie, they need expensive dog treats. So we live for it. This is what I do. I give an analogy to people who I speak to for the first time that if I was a car salesperson, let's say that I'm selling an Audi and I just was standing outside of the Audi and I was kind of looking in and I was trying to sell it to you, I could see some things. I could say, well, it's got leather seats and it's this, and I could point some things out. But boy, if I got in there and I drove it and then I could tell you about how it feels and the power and the fun, you're going to be way more excited about it than if I'm just standing on the outside. And that's what I do with my nonprofits. For nonprofits, I spend about 20 to 30 hours before the event, not just in consulting, but in getting to know who they are. I go volunteer almost with the vast majority of my clients. Some I can't because of either restrictions of who they serve, and there's different clearance levels of safety things, which is totally understandable. Sometimes I just don't have the credentials, to help somebody because it could be counseling services, different things where I can't. But I go sit in committee meetings. I go sit in board meetings. I go take tours because as a professional, if I'm standing up there, Jason, and I'm asking you to give X number of dollars to this organization, and you can tell that I understand them and I'm using the language that mirrors who they are, and I can convey that passion, that is going to make you buy into it more and make you more likely to give money to that organization. Because the one thing that I have found that you cannot fake in this world is being genuine. And that is, we spend so much time, because if I'm standing up there representing your organization, I want that audience to feel as if I'm one of your organizations. One of the best compliments that I get is when the auction is over, somebody comes up to me and they ask, "So Trisha, how long have you been with this organization? How long, and that they truly think I'm a part of that." And that's what I do believe one of the most important things a successful or a professional auctioneer is going to bring to the table. In addition to that, one of my master's degree, it's a master's in business administration with a focus in consumer behavior. I look at fundraising events as a retail store that's open for 5 hours. And so you need to use the same consumer behavior motivational strategies to get people to part with their dollars as Target does, as the grocery store does. How many of you out there have ever gone into Costco, Sam's, Target, and you went in for two things, and $400 later, you leave with the Vegemite that you didn't even know your life was missing? That's how good their marketing worked. And you're happy about the $400 you just spent on the Vegemite thing that you didn't know you needed. We use those same tips and tricks to get the folks who attend your event to give money to the nonprofit organization in ways that they didn't anticipate, but in doing so that they feel so happy at the end of the night that they have a smile when they hand their credit card over.
Right. Well, you brought up a bunch of amazing points in just the first question that I hope we have time to talk about all of them. You said 20 to 30 hours you volunteer. So as I'm digesting that information, I'm thinking, well, you must work with, because there are nonprofits out there that you wouldn't want to donate a shoelace to, much less 20 to 30 hours of your time. Mm-hmm. Is that do you think is that kind of standard in the industry, that you work with organizations that you're passionate about? And what you said is absolutely true. I've done the auction for my boys' school for 14 years now. My last year was last year because my youngest is not in that school anymore. But I have a connection with those people. I understand their language. I understand all the trials and tribulations they're going through. I know the good teachers. I know the bad teachers, right? When I've done events one-offs for other schools, and I don't do a lot of benefit auctions. I do very few actually, but I can sell the objects, but having that connection. So how did you decide to actually start volunteering with these organizations? And then does that limit your scope of work? Does that limit who you would work for?
That's a great question. That's a little bit of a loaded question, but but I like it and I appreciate it. I do believe, I'm thankful enough that I've gotten to a point in my career that I'm able to be a little bit more choosy with who I work with. When you first kind of get into business, and there's no organization that's a bad organization. There's just all things that we relate to better, just based on our own personal interests. And so my clients now, they all have all the causes that I love, but I've gotten some phone calls from some folks that I just knew personality wise that we were not going to be a good fit. And Jason, you've been around the auction business long enough and taken enough classes. There's a phrase that sometimes the best auction that you do is the one you don't take. And so it's understanding that whatever that organization's mission is, if I don't have, if I have strong feelings that don't align with it, I know the best service that I can do is refer them to someone who is more aligned with what their mission is. So for example, if it were an all boys school or an all girls school, I would be a much better auctioneer for an all girls school than rather an all boys school. And so it would just make sense that I would, that I would be an auctioneer for an all girls school. Not that I haven't done some male schools as well, but it just, you see what I'm saying there. So, it's one of those questions that I'm looking now for personality fits, because if we're a team and working with my clients, and if we're not going to be able to work together, then I know that their event's not going to be successful. And Jason, you also know this, that the person who holds the microphone is the person who's responsible for the outcome, regardless of what happens. You could tell folks, things up one side and down the other, and they cannot listen to you. And then when it doesn't go right, it's still going to be your fault. And the flip side is true. When things go amazing, you look like a rock star. And so I'm very blessed. But for the most part, the folks who pick up the phone to reach out to a professional auctioneer, they're looking for someone to be their partner to begin with. And so right off the bat, vast majority of folks that I talk to, I know they're coming from a good spot. Most of the reasons why I can't work with someone is that I'm already booked.
Yeah, well, and I didn't mean I guess it was a little bit of a loaded question. I didn't mean it that way. I mean, in our business, we say no to 99% of the calls we get for people who want to sell things. And it's not because they have bad things or good things or great things, or like I said, the personality, but also like we specialize in art, jewelry, silver, those kinds of things. If somebody calls me with a collection of guns, I can sell them. Right. But I'm not the best option in Kansas City for that. Right. And so because I have passion for those things and you have passion for the areas that you're passionate about, you serve those clients and those communities much, much better. Doesn't mean the others are anything wrong or different or bad about them. Right. It's just, if you can't get into that world, it doesn't matter how good of an auctioneer you are. Then you're just a salesperson. So I think that's all great stuff. So what makes for a successful event? If somebody's putting on events, auctions, what makes for a successful event?
I just thought of something for a question you've got coming up. I wanted to make a note to myself before I forgot. So what makes for a successful event? The first component is events are usually put on by a team of individuals. Very rarely do I see events who are just spearheaded by one person. So you need a strong team who are really invested in the positive outcome of the event. And that's one area that I do a lot of consulting in, is how to train volunteers to be more effective. A lot of folks ask me, well, we have this team of volunteers, and then after our first meeting, like, we never hear from them again. And what I found, the teacher and the trainer in me, is that organizations, they recruit volunteers very well, but then they struggle with how to provide meaningful and effective direction to those volunteers, because there's kind of this dichotomy of folks, and it's the recognition of the person who's in charge to the person who's the volunteer, and it's saying, well, I respect you, Jason, as the volunteer, and so I just want you to do whatever you like. And then, but without any real clear direction on what that looks like. And then Jason, you as the volunteer, the reason why people tend to slink away and you never hear from them again is because one of our greatest fears as human beings is the fear of looking foolish. And so because you weren't provided any sort of direction, any sort of goals, any sort of clear cut, this is what we're doing, you don't know what to do. And you're like, so for example, Jason, just go get us some auction donations. Without giving you examples, we need you to go get 10 $50 gift cards from area restaurants. We need you to go get, oops, lost me here, bud. We need you to go get, 3 bottles of wine, and we need you to secure a condo in Branson. That you could do. You have very clear direction on that. Mm-hmm. Whereas before, you're like, well, what kind of donations do they want? I don't know. And so I work with them to give that direction so that it does help set up the platform right from the very beginning, that it's going to lean towards a successful event. Other things that make it successful, which has changed a little bit over the years, is shorter is better. There used to be the standard Saturday night gala, if you will, where it was very formal. You would see lots of ball gowns, lots of tuxedos, and it would start at 5 o'clock and it would go till midnight. We're not seeing that be the trend any longer. As a matter of fact, it's actually against what a lot of donors want. They want shorter, more condensed, a little bit more relaxed. They want to show up, they want to give their money, they want to go home. So shorter programming, the days of long speeches, statistics, industry jargon, right? It's like, oh my goodness, people will read it. So a great compromise is you put it in the program, write a couple pages about all those things. People will read it while they're waiting. You just don't need to stand on stage and drone on about it for half an hour. Great sound system is one of the number one things. Most venues do not have adequate sound system, especially if you're in a hotel. That's not a knock against a hotel. And this is another analogy that I give. And it is, Jason, did you ever have a clunker of a car when you were a teenager? Did you have a clunker? I had a clunker.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It had a really crappy stereo in it. And if that favorite song came on and you tried to turn it up louder, it sounded worse, because it was just that's not what it was meant to do. And that's somewhat happens in these event spaces, is that they think that we'll just turn it up louder to distort sound. And if people can't hear, regardless of if that's music, a speech, the auctioneer, your mission moment, people are not going to pay attention, and they're going to turn to each other and they're going to start talking. That's one of the biggest things that I hear from folks is like, well, we couldn't get our audience to pay attention. I'm like, I guarantee it's because they couldn't hear. And if they can't hear, they're not going to, they can't listen. And so they're going to look to each other for entertainment. So that's what makes a successful event. And keeping it fresh, a lot of times, I ask folks, well, why are you doing it that way? And they're like, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I want to push nonprofits to be challenging of tradition. There are some things you should do, but you shouldn't do it just because you've always done it. And so I like to challenge people on their thinking of, is this the best thing for us to do, or are we doing it just for the sake of tradition?
Oh, yeah. We've always done it this way is the worst reason to do anything.
Correct.
Well, clear direction for volunteers might be the biggest takeaway for anybody watching this video. And it doesn't matter if it's for a benefit auction or for your kids' school events. Clear directions. So like you said, get us donations doesn't mean anything. Get us 10 gift cards, and it was amazing. Wow, that was so. And I have to tell you, my clunker car had a great stereo, because that's what I want. I thought you were going to go with your car was so loud you couldn't hear the radio over the car.
That's true too.
Which is the same kind of situation. But I spent like $600 on the car and $300 on the stereo.
That sounds about right. I think my brother did the same thing. I think he spent like $1,000 on the car and then $1,000 on the stereo.
I had a 1978 Chrysler Cordoba, and with fine Corinthian leather seats. With
Yeah, you did.
Remember the car stairs? You could actually take the face off of it, so that nobody would break in to steal your car because you had the I had one of those. It was pretty sweet. It was a pretty sweet car. So it was pretty sweet sounding, but driving not so much. It would go fast when it went.
That's so good.
I had a lot of those cars 30 years ago. Not 30 years ago already. So what is the biggest myth about benefit auctions?
Get them drunk and they'll spend more money.
Bingo. If you weren't going to go there, I was. And why is
That's what I wrote down. I wrote down booze. When you asked that earlier, I was like, booze. Drunk people are like kindergartners. Try getting them to pay attention to anything for more than 3 minutes is an absolute task that is a monumental undertaking. So there's always been this thing, we'll get them really liquored up and they're going to spend more money. It's actually the exact opposite, because drunk people do not pay attention. And so and booze is a part of, alcohol is a part of most scaleless culture, which, trust me, like when I go to them as an attendee, yes, I do want that cocktail. I do, it's relaxed, it's social, let's kick back, let's let it loose. So there is a little bit of a fine line of letting folks, have a drink or two to get social and, kind of relax. But, if they're consumed too much, you run into a couple of things. Number one is they stop paying attention. They become much more interested in socializing. That's just natural human behavior. Number two, they become much louder. And so that's another issue with sound systems, especially if you have a poor sound system to begin with. Drunk people just talk louder. I mean, it's just, and you can hear, as Jason, you said you don't do a ton of benefit auctions, but you've done enough that from the time that auction starts at 7:30 to the time you're done, there's a big sound difference in the room because the alcohol keeps flowing and that sound just keeps going up and up and up. And then the third component that it doesn't happen a ton, but I think that we just socially, from a social responsibility component, is that if folks are truly, truly their inhibitions are down, they're not in the right, I don't want to say not the right frame of mind, but they're in that drunken frame of mind. I can personally say I've made some very poor decisions while under the influence of alcohol. It's, hey, you know what? I'm in my 40s. I've been around this world long enough that I can fully admit it and take ownership of that. I don't ever want a donor to have buyer's remorse the day after because they were overserved or they overindulged the night before, and then they wake up the next day and they don't feel good about what they did because they drank too much and now they have regret of how much they spent. We don't find that most donors ask for a refund on any of those things, but what you have, an unintended consequence, is you've placed doubt in that donor's mind of how they feel about your organization because they came with, $1,000 to spend and they ended up spending $3,000, or maybe they came with 100 and they spent 500 because they got, really excited. That could potentially put a real financial burden on them, and then they're gonna have to figure out how to handle that financial burden, and there's gonna be this underlying feeling towards that nonprofit that's not positive. And I think that nonprofits just need to be mindful of that. And it hasn't happened often, but I have seen folks who have been overserved, and then either the night of, because I've seen it happen the night of, that if it's a couple, that one partner might be more sober than the other partner, and we just got off stage selling this trip for $5,000, and sober partner goes up and says, hey, my other partner is wasted and bid on it, and no, we're not buying it. Now we've got this trip, the auction's over. What do we do with it? Were we paying attention to who the backup bidder was and we can maybe get them to buy it? There's just a lot of things that make it more complicated than what people realize. And so obviously I'm not ever saying that there shouldn't be alcohol at events, because I do think that it's very important. People expect it, but starting the event later in the night to allow them to consume more is one of the things that I am really, really adamant when I coach and counsel my clients of making sure we start start at the appropriate time. So let's start. They want to give us their money. Let's give them their money and then let them party.
Right.
It's fine.
So yeah, I've experienced all those things. Bad PA, drunk people. You got the PA at 10, you're screaming, and you still can't keep your ear past the third row. But I've also been, so as I've done more and been around and listened to people like you, I've watched some of your videos. I've Gala Janelle out of Florida, I'm friends with. I've taken her class. There's some really easy things you can do. We've just told our benefits not to serve alcohol during the auction, not have food service, not have anything, so that the attention of the room is on you. Are there any other things that you can do as far as the alcohol is concerned to limit that consumption before and during the auction?
I just think that starting the program earlier in the night is one of the bigger things. There's no reason that you have a 2-hour cocktail hour and then shuffle everybody in for dinner and then wait until everybody's done eating. And so now you're another hour and a half in before you're starting the programming / fundraising component. Cocktail hour, an hour, get folks, either seated or through the buffet. And then, you're starting that fundraising, 15 to 30 minutes after their rear ends are in the seat. You don't need to wait. I love doing fundraising while people are eating. They're chewing, so they tend to be more quiet. They're occupied, so they're seated, which there is a very psychological difference between paying attention when you're seated versus paying attention when you're standing. So you want people seated as much as possible. And then another myth about fundraising is that at most events, people come as a unit. They come as a couple. They come as a partnership, whether that be married or in a committed relationship. And against what a lot of people think is you do want partners together when it comes to fundraising, because most people have talked about money that's going to be spent. And when they get separated, if they're bidding on something and they get outbid, would my partner be okay if I bid another $100? Oh, they're at the bar, and they stop bidding. Whereas if they're sitting next to each other, hey, you okay if we do that? Yeah, I know it's a little bit more than we talked about, but oh yeah, go ahead. And allows them to have that conversation. So that's one of the biggest things, Jason, is just getting started. I love, if doors open about 5:30, 6 o'clock, I love that fundraising to be getting started no later than 7:30.
Yeah, and bringing the alcohol to that part of it. When the husband and wife or husband and husband or friends, whatever partners are sitting next to each other and they've had 1 or 2 drinks, they're much more agreeable.
Yes.
And cognizant of what they're agreeing to. Like you talk about making bad decisions when you've had too much. I'm in my 40s, I'm closer to 50 than 40 anymore. We've all had those instances where we wake up the next morning not feeling well physically and mentally because of things that we said or did the night before. And I think that's such a crucial thing that all benefit organizations, fundraising events should take into account. 1 or 2 drinks for a happy hour, glass of wine or a cocktail with dinner while you're eating, so you have food, and sell then. So before we finally get to our last question about the future of benefit auctions, we talked about a free financial review of last events for nonprofit people who are watching. What does this? What do you give for that? This is from Trisha and taking bids fundraising. What does somebody get with that? And then if you want that, just go ahead and post your nonprofit organization comments below, and Trisha or I will reach out to you through DM on any of these platforms. So what do you offer for your free financial review, and what can somebody in an organization expect to receive and benefit by getting that?
That's a great question. Thank you. One of the things that I have really strived to do with my fundraising company is to not just be somebody who's able to show up on stage that night and, do the emotional appeal, the funded need to conduct the live auction, but to understand what the financial impacts of, there's really 5 major revenue sources that go into most nonprofit events. And we've collected enough data over the last 10 years that allows us to see where the areas of your events are performing really well from a financial standpoint. And we also are able to do an analysis of the areas that your event might possibly be underperforming. So we've collected a ton of data on, how many people typically buy a raffle ticket at a nonprofit event, whether that be a $20 price point to a $100 price point or a $200 price point of a raffle ticket. We've collected data on silent auction and we group it by category. And so we know how financially various categories within the silent auction is going to perform. So we're able to say, typically, now this year's an anomaly. I'm just going to say that. There is nothing from 2020 that, woof, what the heck is going on? So typically, a category that performs really poorly is household items. So paintings and rugs and decorative pieces, those typically bring about 40% of retail value. So if it would cost $100 in the store, you're going to expect $40 in your silent auction. That's not a good rate of return. But things that we know that are great rates of return are food baskets. So if you put together an Italian themed food basket that sells, typically in the store for $100, you're going to expect a $90 return. Sadly, silent auctions are not over 100% rate of return, but we can tell you what the categories are so that you're able to get more items that are going to bring you more money. The same thing goes with live auction items. We have broken down live auction items into 9 categories. And so we're able to say these, this is what the retail was in this category. Are your items bringing what they should be? That could be through, again, poor sound system, not properly marketing the items before the event. It could be again, if you're using somebody who's not a professional auctioneer, they could be lacking some salesmanship skills or other components that would make them more successful. But then the big one is also the funded need. That's where my company's really excelled at, is we've collected the data over the years. So we know what percentage of people should be giving at every level. So we're able to look at your funded need numbers and say, based on what our performance is, these different categories, you should expect to have this many bidders, donors at that level, and see what the discrepancies are. So you can see that there's room for financial growth within your event.
That's amazing. We use data in our marketing all the time.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that you've taken the idea of data and the idea of monitoring those different assets to a degree that you have. Which I think more than anything else sets apart a professional benefit auctioneer and a professional benefit fundraiser than someone like myself who's really good at what I do, and I can call an auction like the best of them. I don't have that data, that information, that base of knowledge that you can only get when you hire the plumber to do the plumbing. And so that's amazing, amazing, amazing stuff. And I hope that people take advantage of that. Again, post your nonprofit organization in the comments below, or if you want to reach out to Trisha specifically, her email is here, and her phone number, Trisha at takingbids.benefitauctions.com or 913-481-8280. That brings us to our final question. What do you see, and you mentioned COVID and the corona, the pandemic, the roller coaster that we've all been on for the last 4, 5, 6 months now. Taking that into account, but also not taking that into account, because this will be a short-lived event. It feels like forever now because we're in the midst of it, but in a couple of years, in 5 years, in 10 years, it'll be a footnote. We'll look back at the pictures of us wearing masks in our Facebook timelines and go, oh my God, remember 2020? We'll look at the pictures of our kids getting graduating with masks on, and they'll have a story to tell forever. So with that in mind, and with long-term in mind, what do you see as the future of fundraising events, in any aspect you want to talk about?
Well, I love that you called it the Corona coaster. I am going to steal that because that is hilarious. Yeah,
the Rona coaster is something that is absolutely, I'm talking to having a mental health expert on in a couple of weeks. Because we obviously, we work in the States, obviously, a lot, and that's one of the most stressful times in anybody's life. So mental health is a huge issue, topic of concern that we have for us, but also for our clients. But absolutely, right now, it's even more important. So yeah, the roller coaster is definitely a thing we're all cognizant of right now.
It is, and that's I'm excited. I will make sure that I tune into that one because that'll be very interesting information. So, what does the future of fundraising look like? I want to give. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the roller coaster component, but I do feel very passionate to say this. Common sense when it comes to what is happening does need to be evaluated and addressed. But during any sort of crisis, whether that, and we go through a crisis every 10 years, right? 2001 was 9/11, 2008-9 was the real estate, 2020 is now coronavirus. So it's something that happens, right? You've been around long enough, I've been around long enough that there's every 10 years, there's going to be something that impacts society in a major way. Right now it's coronavirus. A lot of times during these crises, people feel uncomfortable asking for things, whether that be anything from, hey, remember when I needed help moving stuff, Jason, and you like, oh, Will might be able to come help. I even felt awkward asking for help moving something because we're so mindful that, oh my gosh, everybody has so much stuff going on. I don't want to have to ask because I don't want to add that onto somebody else's plate. But what we know from the psychology of fundraising is people want to give. They truly want to give, and passive fundraising is not effective. By having a mentality that says, well, we're a nonprofit, people know we need money, they'll give it to us if they can, does not work. It doesn't. People will, if you flat out raise your hand up and say, we need help, people will respond. If you don't say that you need help, they assume that you've either received a grant, that somebody left you in their will, all these other ways that you could obtain money. So taking a year off of fundraising, which let's just be real, could bleed into 2021. I already have some folks who are, February and March clients who are, rethinking what their event's going to look like. So please, nonprofits that are listening, do not take this year off of asking for money, because what will happen is if I'm a donor to your cause and you don't ask me for money, somebody else will, and I will give them that money. And then I'm now going to have a relationship with them. And so you're going to have to steal me back to get me back, which is hard to do. So do not give your folks a reason to leave you. So I'll get off that soapbox. What does the future of fundraising look like? Donors, they want to know the impact. And so being very clear and deliberate with your messaging of what's going on. One of the biggest trends that we've started to see that I very much think is going to really go into the future, Jason, is I want to go back to that Saturday night gala where people wore fancy ball gowns and tuxedos, and there was a big band afterwards, and there were these beautiful decorations and this elaborate meal. Donors don't want that, because what they realize is this is my money is going to pay for this party. So get rid of the $20,000 for the band. You don't need to be spending $10,000 on centerpiece decorations. They want that money to go back into the cause. That's why they're giving the money. They don't necessarily want these big things. And so we've actually seen some very interesting feedback from donors where there's been expensive ticket items at nonprofits, and they actually did not go over well because people were like, well, you just spent $10,000 on that acrobatic act. Like, yeah, it was cool, but you could have, done X much more in the community. And that's what we want to see our dollars go to. So I think that's going to be huge. The next one is going to be more emphasis on constant communication with your donors. Now, again, I don't mean every single day, but I joke around that you don't want to be the outcast in-law that only calls when they need money. And so you're going to want to have those touch points of communication throughout the year that let donors know, hey, what's going on, and that when you're communicating with them, it's just not to hit them up for money. And then another future of fundraising is that communication, and we're starting to see this again already, and I think it's just incredibly important. And again, some of these things require more human resource power, but it's critical, and that is customized communications. One of the things that actually really infuriates people is dear donor letters. You couldn't even use mail merge to get my name in there, and you're asking me for money. And so being mindful that you need to thank your donors in a meaningful way that is customized to them. One of the programs that we've been working on is a event analysis of how donors behave. And so we've been capturing how people bid during auctions, both in the live auction and silent auction. And I won't go into it a ton, but I absolutely love it. And so let's say that I'm Trisha, and this was our first case study that we did. It was a 26-year-old teacher who went to an event. Obviously, when you're 26, you're not making a ton of money. And she's a teacher, so she's definitely not making a ton of money. She's got student loan debt probably, right? And she's just getting on her feet as an adult. She comes to this event and she bid like crazy in the silent auction. Now, she didn't really win anything. I think she won 2 items that it came to like $55. Well, we did an analysis that every time she bid, so what we found was that she helped raise $380 more because she was pushing those bids up. So we sent a letter to her afterwards that said, "Dear Trisha, thank you for coming. We appreciate the $55 that you donated in the silent auction. But what you don't know is you helped us raise another $380 because you were bidding so much in the silent auction that you pushed those bids up. And if it hadn't been for you, we wouldn't have raised that money." And she called in tears and was like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't even feel like I was helping. I felt, terribly embarrassed because I didn't have any money to give." And so it made her feel so valuable to know that she helped raise, with the money she did spend and the money she helped push up, that she helped contribute over $400. And that's really meaningful money. So really communicating with your donors the positive things that they're doing, and thinking outside the box is really what's going to set, nonprofits apart and keeping their donor base.
Well, that's an amazing. Do you offer classes about benefit auctions in your regular life? I mean, do you offer coursework? Because you have an incredible amount of information and knowledge in your system and database and brain that as you're talking, I'm like, wow, I probably should take BAS because I'm assuming some of this information is going to be there.
Yeah, a little. I haven't, but I've actually thought about it for nonprofits of putting together, some sort of boot camp for it. We actually had we had a couple of amazing programs that we did focus studies on at the beginning of the year, and then we were getting ready to roll everything out April 1st, and there we are. So we're waiting. Hopefully April 1st next year.
I know you speak quite a bit. I saw videos of you at Nonprofit Connect. I know that you speak to organizations around the area. Always amazing to give you time. Just to recap the future, and I think they're great points to remember for any business owner and for any nonprofit. Work smarter, not harder is what I took from your first tip. Don't spend it. When you've mentioned this here in other places, $20,000 in flowers, that's a mind-boggling number. And there's not an organization in the world that can't find good use for that money. That's an employee. That's a solid part-time employee plus. Constant relevant communication with your patrons and donors is so huge. Like you said, don't be the person who just always asks, "Can I use your pickup truck to move furniture?" Reach out to them with other things going on. Send them pictures of the house after you've set it up. And with the nonprofit, send them pictures of what the money raised did for the community. It's such a huge thing. And then finally, customization and personalization of communication is so huge. In fact, I've taught classes at the NAA about this, and have speaking to a couple of state associations about personalization, because it's such a, Amazon, YouTube, Facebook, Google know us intimately, and people expect the organizations they work with to know them as well. They don't like it, but they expect it. And it's not easy to do, but once you understand it and put a little work into it, like you said, mail merge, get the name in the email. It should never be "thank you, donor," or just our fundraising. It's "Hi, Trisha. Hi, Jason. Thank you for supporting and doing those things." Trisha, it's been amazing. As we wrap up today's episode of the KC Auction video blog, I want to thank Trisha for being on. I also want to thank you all for watching and sharing this with friends and family that you have. We do this every week here. If you have questions to me specifically, you always ask them to me at info@kcauctioncompany.com, or give us a phone call at 816-283-3633. As we wrap up the video blog here, Trisha, as people are thinking about questions they want to ask, thank you again so much for being on. I appreciate all of the information you've shared with us and with our viewers today and in the future. Is there any final thoughts you want to share before we wrap this up?
With just appreciation to you, Jason, and for allowing me to come on here today. it's really awesome to have another auctioneer and friend here in the KC metro area. And the content that you push out is absolutely phenomenal. I've also learned a ton from Jason as well. For those of you who are watching, he is the real deal. That man knows his business. And it's truly an honor to have you ask me to be here today. And so I just want to thank you very much for that.
Well, you're welcome, and expect to see this about 15 seconds cut out and plastered everywhere. He is the real deal. I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah.
And it's on video now. It has to be true. Trisha,
It is. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Again, if you're watching, have any questions, I'll post them below. Send us emails, DMs, whatever you want to do. Again, that free offer from Trisha is going to be is around as long as she is. If you want a free financial evaluation for your nonprofit, reach out to Trisha or post your nonprofit below. Thank you all so much for watching. Trisha, thanks for joining me. And we'll see everybody next week when I have Mike Brandley on, who is an incredibly intelligent auctioneer from Ohio. We will be talking about the current state of and the future state of the auction industry, which is going to be, I'm hoping, an epic and amazing conversation. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, Trisha, and have a great weekend.
Take care.